5 years later, his struggling company was acquired by an international corporation. Confidently, he walked into the boardroom, expecting to negotiate. Boardroom doors opened. Sitting at the head of the table, wearing the CEO's nameplate, was the same woman he had abandoned, Emily.
The woman who believed in his dreams. The rain tapped gently against the windows of a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. Inside, the scent of tomato soup filled the air as Emily Carter stirred a pot on the stove. She glanced at the old wall clock. It was almost 10 p.m. Daniel was late again. Not because he was out enjoying himself, but because he was working another long shift while trying to build the technology company he dreamed of owning someday. Emily smiled to herself as she set 2 bowls on the small dining table. "We're almost there," she whispered, though no one was there to hear her. A moment later, the apartment door opened. Daniel stepped inside, soaked from the rain, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. His suit jacket was wrinkled, and dark circles framed his eyes. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly. "The investors turned me down again." Emily walked over without hesitation and wrapped him in a warm embrace. "It's okay," she said softly. "You'll find the right people." Daniel let out a tired laugh. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing a dream that's too big." Emily gently took his face in her hands. "Daniel," he looked into her eyes. "Do you remember what you told me the day we got married?" He smiled faintly. "I said we'd build a life together." "And we will," Emily replied. "Whether we have $1 or $1 million, I'm with you." Daniel's eyes filled with emotion. "I don't deserve you." Emily laughed softly. "Then spend the rest of your life proving me wrong." They shared a quiet laugh before sitting down to eat. The meal was simple: soup, bread, tea. But to Emily, it felt like a feast because they still had each other. Over the next 3 years, life remained difficult. Emily worked 2 jobs to help pay the bills. She quietly sold the jewelry her late grandmother had left her so Daniel could attend an important business conference. She never told him where the money came from. When his laptop broke just days before a major investor presentation, Emily emptied her savings account to buy him a new one. Again, she never mentioned the sacrifice. Every time Daniel wanted to give up, Emily reminded him why he had started. "You weren't born to quit," she would say. Little by little, Daniel's company began attracting attention. 1 investor became 2. 2 became 10. Within a few years, the struggling startup transformed into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the region. The newspapers called Daniel Carter a visionary entrepreneur. Business magazines praised his leadership. Television networks requested interviews. Everyone celebrated Daniel's success. Almost no one knew about the woman who had quietly stood beside him through every failure, every rejection, and every sleepless night. Emily never complained. She never asked for recognition. Seeing Daniel succeed was enough for her. One evening, as Daniel adjusted his expensive new suit before an awards banquet, Emily admired him with pride. "You look handsome," she said. Daniel smiled briefly but barely looked away from his reflection. "Thank you." His phone buzzed. Another invitation. Another interview. Another business dinner. Emily noticed something had changed. Not all at once. Little by little. The man who once rushed home to share dinner now spent most evenings with executives. The husband who once asked for her opinion on every decision now made important choices without even mentioning them. She tried to convince herself it was only temporary. "He's under pressure," she whispered. "He still loves me." She believed it with all her heart. She had no idea that success wasn't just changing Daniel's life. It was beginning to change Daniel himself. 3 years passed. Daniel Carter's company, Carter Innovations, had become one of the fastest-growing technology firms in Chicago. Business magazines praised his vision, financial news channels invited him for interviews, and prestigious organizations competed to honor him with awards. His face appeared on magazine covers. His name was spoken in boardrooms across the country. He had become everything he once dreamed of being. Emily couldn't have been happier. Every newspaper clipping featuring Daniel found its way into a scrapbook she kept hidden in their bedroom drawer. Whenever someone congratulated her husband, she smiled with genuine pride. "That's my Daniel," she would whisper to herself. She never imagined that the success she had prayed for would slowly begin to steal the man she loved. One Friday evening, Emily carefully prepared Daniel's favorite dinner: roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables. She even baked the chocolate cake he loved before they could afford expensive restaurants. Candles flickered softly on the dining table. She checked the clock. 7 o'clock, then 8. By 9, the food had gone cold. At 9:30, Daniel finally walked through the front door. He loosened his tie and tossed his expensive leather briefcase onto the sofa without looking toward the dining room. "I'm exhausted," he sighed. Emily forced a warm smile. "I kept dinner waiting." Daniel glanced at the table. "Oh, I already ate with the investors." Emily's smile faded for only a second before she recovered. "That's okay." She quietly stood and began clearing the untouched plates. Daniel never noticed the disappointment in her eyes. Over the following weeks, the distance between them grew. Business trips became more frequent. Phone calls during dinner became normal. Weekend meetings replaced quiet mornings together. Daniel was physically present less and less. Emotionally, he seemed even farther away. One Sunday morning, Emily found herself drinking coffee alone on their balcony. She looked at the empty chair across from her. Just months earlier, Daniel would have been sitting there, laughing, planning their future. Now, silence had taken his place. Late one evening, Daniel arrived home carrying several luxury shopping bags. Emily's eyes widened. "You went shopping?" Daniel nodded distractedly. "I needed clothes for next month's leadership summit." He pulled out several designer suits, Italian leather shoes, luxury watches. Emily admired them. "They're beautiful." Daniel looked at her simple dress. "You should probably update your wardrobe too." Emily laughed gently. "I like my clothes." Daniel hesitated before speaking. "They're a little plain." The words stung more than he realized. Emily looked down at the blue dress she had worn countless times. She had bought it years ago because every extra dollar had gone toward Daniel's dream. She smiled anyway. "I'll think about it." A week later, Daniel invited Emily to attend a prestigious charity gala. Emily was excited. It had been months since they had gone anywhere together. She spent hours getting ready. She styled her hair carefully. She wore the elegant pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. When she walked downstairs, she smiled. "What do you think?" Daniel looked up. Instead of admiration, uncertainty crossed his face. "You're wearing that." Emily looked down. "I thought it looked nice." Daniel sighed. The executives' wives usually wear designer gowns. Emily's smile slowly disappeared. "This is the nicest dress I own." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I just don't want people thinking." He stopped himself. "Thinking what?" Emily asked softly. Daniel looked away. "Nothing." But she already understood. For the first time in their marriage, her husband seemed embarrassed by her. The gala was held in one of Chicago's most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A string quartet played softly as guests in elegant gowns and tailored tuxedos mingled beneath golden lights. Emily felt out of place. not because of her dress, but because Daniel barely left her side long enough to introduce her before moving on to another conversation. She wandered quietly through the ballroom, smiling politely whenever someone greeted her. Then she overheard two women talking nearby. "Who's that woman with Daniel Carter? I think she's his wife." "Really? I expected someone more sophisticated." The women laughed quietly. Emily lowered her eyes and walked away before they noticed her. She found a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. The cool night air brushed against her face. A tear slipped down her cheek, not because strangers had judged her, but because Daniel hadn't defended her. He hadn't even noticed she was gone. Inside the ballroom, Daniel stood surrounded by investors and executives. Among them was a confident, glamorous marketing consultant named Vanessa Reed. She laughed easily, spoke with confidence, and knew exactly how to command attention. She extended her hand. "Mr. Carter, congratulations on your success." Daniel smiled. "Thank you. I've heard a lot about you, and hopefully only the good things." Vanessa laughed. "So far, yes." Neither of them realized Emily was standing at the entrance, quietly watching the conversation. She wasn't jealous. She simply noticed something she hadn't seen in years. Daniel was smiling, the kind of genuine smile he used to reserve for her. Emily turned away before he saw her. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'm just imagining things." But deep inside, a quiet fear had begun to grow. The fear that the man she had sacrificed everything for was slowly becoming a stranger. Sometimes a marriage doesn't break in a single day. Sometimes it breaks one unanswered conversation, one forgotten dinner, one disappointed look, until two people who once shared one dream wake up living two completely different lives. Monday morning arrived with its usual rush. The headquarters of Carter Innovations buzzed with energy. Employees hurried through the glass corridors, assistants prepared for meetings, and executives gathered in the boardroom for the company's largest marketing presentation of the year. Daniel adjusted his tie as he entered the conference room. "Good morning, everyone." "Good morning, Mr. Carter," the room replied almost in unison. At the far end of the table stood a woman in a tailored white suit, organizing a presentation on the large screen. She turned confidently and smiled. "Mr. Carter, I'm Vanessa Reed. It's an honor to finally meet you." Daniel returned the smile. "The pleasure is mine." Vanessa was the lead consultant hired by the company's new advertising agency. She was intelligent, articulate, and remarkably confident. She knew how to command attention without raising her voice. As the presentation began, she spoke with calm authority. "Our research shows your company has outgrown its current image," she explained. "You're no longer a promising startup. You're becoming a global brand. Everything about your public image should reflect that." Daniel leaned forward with interest. She understood the language of ambition. By the end of the meeting, the board applauded her presentation. Daniel nodded in approval. "Excellent work." Vanessa smiled. "I had a great company to work with." Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes it was a strategy meeting, sometimes a client dinner, sometimes a business flight. At first, everything remained professional. But Vanessa possessed a gift that few people noticed. She knew exactly what people longed to hear. One evening after a successful investor meeting, she walked beside Daniel toward the parking garage. "You know," she said casually, "I've worked with dozens of CEOs." Daniel chuckled. "And none of them work as hard as you." Daniel laughed modestly. "I still have a long way to go." "Maybe," Vanessa replied, "but people like you don't come along often." Daniel thanked her and drove home. He didn't realize how much those words stayed with him. Meanwhile, Emily waited at home. She had prepared dinner once again. This time she didn't light candles. She didn't expect Daniel to arrive early anymore. When he finally entered the house, his phone was still pressed against his ear. Yes, move Thursday's meeting to New York. He walked straight past Emily. She smiled anyway. I made your favorite pasta. Daniel held up one finger, asking her to wait while he finished the call. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When he finally hung up, the food had already grown cold. I'm sorry, he said. Today was crazy. Emily forced another smile. I understand. But inside, she wondered how many more evenings would end this way. Weeks turned into months. Daniel and Vanessa became the face of several successful company campaigns. Business magazines frequently photographed them together at conferences and networking events. One Saturday morning, Emily sat at the breakfast table flipping through a magazine. Her smile disappeared. Across 2 full pages was a photograph of Daniel and Vanessa laughing together at a business gala. The headline read, "The brilliant CEO and the marketing genius behind Carter Innovation's new image." Emily stared quietly at the picture. She wasn't upset because another woman appeared beside her husband. She was hurt because the smile on Daniel's face reminded her of happier days. Days when he looked at her that way. Daniel entered the kitchen moments later. "Oh," he said, noticing the magazine. "That's just publicity." Emily nodded gently. "I know." She closed the magazine and continued eating. But something in her heart had begun to crack. A few days later, Carter Innovations hosted another formal dinner for investors. Emily arrived wearing a simple navy blue gown. She had spent hours preparing because she wanted Daniel to feel proud to stand beside her. As they entered the ballroom, Daniel looked around nervously. "Emily." "Yes. I'll probably be busy talking with investors tonight." "I understand. If you get bored, maybe head home early." Emily blinked. "You don't want me to stay?" Daniel hesitated. "It's just, these events can be overwhelming." Emily smiled politely. "I'll be fine." She kissed his cheek. "I came to support you." Daniel smiled briefly before being pulled away by another executive. Emily watched him disappear into the crowd. Later that evening, Vanessa approached Daniel carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You look exhausted." "I am." She handed him a glass. "You carry the weight of an entire company." Daniel sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone understands the pressure." Vanessa looked directly into his eyes. "I do." For a brief moment, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He felt understood. Across the ballroom, Emily watched the conversation from a distance. She saw Vanessa laughing. She saw Daniel laughing too. She didn't hear their words. She didn't need to. The distance between them spoke louder than any conversation ever could. As the evening ended, Emily and Daniel drove home in silence. Halfway through the journey, Emily finally spoke. "Daniel, are we okay?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Of course we are. You've changed. I've just been busy. I miss you." Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I can't keep having this conversation." Emily looked out the window. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the drive. That night, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. Beside her, Daniel slept peacefully. She quietly reached for his hand, then stopped. For the first time since they had married, she wasn't sure if he still wanted her to. Little did she know, the greatest heartbreak of her life was no longer approaching. It had already begun. Autumn arrived quietly. The trees lining the streets of Chicago had turned shades of gold and crimson, but inside the Carter home, the warmth that once filled every room had slowly disappeared. Emily still woke up every morning before sunrise. She prepared Daniel's breakfast, pressed his suits, packed his lunch, kissed him goodbye, and every morning, Daniel seemed to leave a little faster than the day before. One Tuesday, Emily stood by the front door holding his coffee. "You forgot this." Daniel glanced at his watch. "I'm already late. I'll walk it to your car." "No need." He took the cup without looking at her. "Thanks." Then he drove away. Emily remained standing on the porch long after the car had disappeared. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She was simply trying to remember the last time her husband had hugged her without being in a hurry. She couldn't. That afternoon, Grace Carter invited Emily to lunch. Grace had noticed the change in her son's marriage long before either of them admitted it. As they sat in a quiet cafe, Grace reached across the table and gently held Emily's hand. "My dear." Emily smiled. "I'm fine." Grace looked at her with the wisdom of a mother. "No, you've been saying you're fine for months." Emily lowered her eyes. "I don't know what happened. I keep asking myself if I did something wrong." Grace shook her head immediately. "You didn't." Emily's voice trembled. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing him?" Grace sighed deeply. "Success can be a blessing, but if we're not careful, it can also become a temptation." Emily looked at her. "Do you think Daniel still loves me?" Grace hesitated. "I believe he has forgotten who helped him become the man he is." Those words stayed with Emily long after lunch ended. Across town, Daniel and Vanessa were celebrating another successful business deal. The executives applauded. Champagne glasses were raised. Everyone praised Daniel's leadership. Vanessa leaned closer. "You've built an incredible life." Daniel smiled. "It wasn't easy. I can imagine." She studied him for a moment. "But are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He laughed softly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because successful people often confuse achievement with happiness." Daniel looked away. "I've never thought about it." Vanessa smiled knowingly. "You should." Days later, Emily decided to surprise Daniel at the office. She prepared his favorite homemade lasagna. She carefully wrapped it and drove to Carter Innovations. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mrs. Carter, it's so nice to see you. I'm just bringing Daniel lunch." Of course. Emily rode the elevator to the executive floor. She walked quietly toward Daniel's office. Just before reaching the door, she heard laughter. Daniel's laughter. It had been so long since she'd heard him laugh like that. The office door wasn't completely closed. Emily stopped. Inside, Daniel and Vanessa were sharing lunch. Vanessa laughed as she gently brushed a crumb from Daniel's jacket. "You always make such a mess." Daniel laughed too. "You sound like my wife." Vanessa smiled. Maybe she has good taste. For a brief moment, neither of them noticed Emily standing outside. Emily looked down at the warm container of lasagna in her hands. She had spent hours preparing it. Slowly, she turned around. She didn't knock. She didn't interrupt. She simply walked back toward the elevator. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached her car, the tears she had been holding back finally fell. Not because Daniel had done something unforgivable, but because another woman now shared the laughter that used to belong to her. That evening, Daniel came home carrying a bouquet of flowers. Emily looked surprised. "They're beautiful. I've been busy lately." "I know. I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight." Emily smiled politely. "I already ate." Daniel frowned. "You usually wait." "I was hungry." She wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was simply tired. Daniel noticed the change. For the first time, Emily no longer looked at him with the same hopeful eyes. Something inside her had quietly begun to close. Late that night, Daniel received a message. His phone lit up on the bedside table. Emily wasn't trying to invade his privacy. She simply glanced toward the light. The message preview appeared on the screen. Vanessa, thank you for today. I haven't laughed like that in years. A second message arrived. Drive safely tomorrow. Don't work too hard. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Emily stared silently. She didn't touch the phone. She didn't wake Daniel. She quietly turned onto her side. A single tear rolled across her pillow. She whispered into the darkness. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's still something left to save. Beside her, Daniel slept peacefully, completely unaware that his wife had just experienced the loneliest night of her entire marriage. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins the moment someone else becomes the person you share your heart with first. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the streets of Chicago, and the Carter home, once filled with laughter and dreams, had grown painfully quiet. For weeks, Daniel barely spoke during dinner. Most nights, he worked late. Some nights, he didn't come home until after midnight. Emily stopped asking where he had been, not because she no longer cared, but because she feared the answer. One Saturday morning, Emily woke early and found Daniel already dressed in the living room. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't on a business call. He was simply sitting in silence, staring at the fireplace. You're up early, Emily said with a gentle smile. Daniel looked up. We need to talk. Those 4 words sent a chill through her heart. She slowly sat across from him. What is it? Daniel took a deep breath. I don't think this marriage is working anymore. Emily blinked. I don't understand. I've changed. We've both changed. Emily shook her head. No, we've been distant, yes. But we can fix that. Daniel looked away. I don't want to fix it. The room fell silent. Emily searched his face, hoping to find some sign that he didn't mean it. Instead, she found only exhaustion. Daniel, please tell me this is just stress. He closed his eyes. It's more than that. Emily reached for his hand. He gently pulled it away. That tiny movement hurt more than any harsh words could have. What happened to us? She whispered. Daniel sighed. I've become someone different. Then let me learn the new you. You shouldn't have to. We made vows. I know. We promised forever. I know. Then why are you giving up? Daniel's voice grew quiet. Because I don't love you the way I used to. Those words broke something inside Emily. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't even cry. The silence between them felt louder than any argument. Daniel stood and walked to the dining table. A large envelope rested there. He picked it up. I've already spoken with an attorney. Emily looked at the envelope. Her hands began to tremble. No. Daniel placed it gently in front of her. I'm asking for a divorce. Emily stared at the papers as though they belonged to someone else. This couldn't be happening. Not to them. Not after everything they had survived together. Tears filled her eyes. Was I not enough? Daniel immediately looked ashamed. This isn't about you. Then what is it about? He couldn't answer, because deep inside, he wasn't entirely sure himself. He only knew that the exciting world of wealth, status, and ambition had slowly pulled him away from the woman who had loved him before any of those things existed. Emily stood and walked toward the bedroom. A few moments later, she returned carrying an old cardboard box. Daniel frowned. What's that? She opened it. Inside were memories. A faded photograph from their first apartment. Movie tickets from their first date. The receipt for the second-hand sofa they had proudly bought together. A handwritten notebook filled with business ideas Daniel had almost thrown away years ago. Emily smiled through her tears. Do you remember saying this company would never exist without us? Daniel lowered his eyes. She picked up another item. The receipt for the laptop she had secretly bought after selling her grandmother's jewelry. You asked me where the money came from. I told you I'd been saving. I lied. Daniel looked at her, confused. Emily's voice cracked. I sold the only family heirloom I had because I believed in your dream more than I believed in having something beautiful for myself. Daniel's face turned pale. She lifted another envelope. My savings account. I emptied it so you could attend that investor conference in New York. You never knew. I wanted you to succeed. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. He had never known the full extent of her sacrifices. Emily looked directly into his eyes. I never regretted any of it. My only regret is that somewhere along the way, you forgot we were building that dream together. The room fell silent. Daniel had no words. For the first time in years, he truly saw everything Emily had given up for him. The next day, Daniel met with Vanessa for coffee. She noticed he seemed distracted. Everything okay? Daniel hesitated. I asked Emily for a divorce. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. You deserve to be happy. Daniel nodded slowly. But for some reason, those words didn't bring him peace. Instead, he remembered Emily's tear-filled eyes. He remembered the box of memories. He remembered the life they had built from nothing. For the first time, a small voice inside him whispered, "Have I made the biggest mistake of my life?" 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Emily walked out of the courthouse carrying only a small box of personal belongings. No reporters waited. No friends gathered. Only cold winter wind greeted her. She stood on the courthouse steps and looked up at the gray sky. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered softly, I gave you my youth. I gave you my faith. I gave you my dreams. But I will not give you my future. She wiped away her tears, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the unknown, without realizing that the next chapter of her life would become far greater than anything she had ever imagined. Sometimes God closes a door that your broken heart still wants to keep open, because He can see the future you cannot. The morning after the divorce felt strangely quiet. Emily woke before sunrise, just as she had for years. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. She reached toward the other side of the bed. It was empty. The silence reminded her that this was no longer her home. She sat on the edge of the bed, closed her eyes, and whispered, Lord, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but please give me the strength to take one more step today. A week later, Emily rented a small apartment on the north side of Chicago. It wasn't luxurious. The paint on the walls had begun to fade. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person. The bedroom window overlooked an old brick building instead of the city skyline. But for the first time in months, the apartment gave her something the mansion never had: peace. She unpacked the last box. Inside were photographs from happier days. She picked up the wedding picture. Daniel was smiling. She was smiling. Two young dreamers, certain they would face the world together. A tear slipped down her cheek. Slowly, she placed the photograph back into the box. I'm grateful for what we had, she whispered, but I can't live in yesterday. She closed the box and slid it beneath the bed, not because she wanted to erase her past, but because she had finally decided to stop living inside it. Money became her biggest concern. Although the divorce settlement gave her enough to survive for a while, Emily refused to depend on it forever. She wanted something no one could ever take away: her own future. The next morning, she updated her resume and began applying for jobs. One interview, then another. then another. Each ended the same way. We're looking for someone with more recent corporate experience. We've chosen another candidate. Thank you for your time. After the 10th rejection, Emily sat alone on a park bench. The cold wind swept fallen leaves across the path. She stared at the rejection letters in her hands. For a moment, the voice of doubt crept into her mind. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I really don't belong in that world anymore. Then she remembered something Daniel had once said years ago, before success changed him. You weren't born to quit. Emily smiled sadly. Funny, you taught me that. She folded the letters neatly and stood up. If I believed in your dream, I can believe in mine. That evening, Emily visited Grace Carter. Daniel's mother welcomed her with a warm embrace. My dear, I've missed you. Emily smiled through her tears. I've missed you too. They sat together in the kitchen, sharing tea just as they had done many times before. Grace looked at Emily with gentle concern. What are you going to do now? Emily hesitated. I don't know. I've spent so many years helping someone else build a future. I forgot to build one for myself. Grace reached across the table and squeezed her hand. My dear, it is never too late to begin again. Emily looked into her eyes. I don't even know where to start. Grace smiled knowingly. You start exactly where you are. One small step, then another, and before you realize it, you'll be standing somewhere you never imagined. Those words settled deep in Emily's heart. The following week, Emily walked past a community college on her way home. A large banner hung above the entrance. It's never too late to rewrite your future. She stopped. She stared at the banner for several seconds. Students of all ages walked through the doors. Some looked young enough to be her children. Others were older than she was. Emily slowly walked inside. A receptionist greeted her warmly. Can I help you? Emily took a deep breath. I'd like information about your business management program. The receptionist smiled. I'd be happy to help. For the first time since the divorce, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. That night, she sat alone at her tiny kitchen table. Books surrounded her. A notebook lay open before her. She wrote one sentence across the first page. This chapter of my life belongs to me. She underlined it twice. Then she opened her first textbook. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, a new dream quietly began to grow. Across town, Daniel stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. The city celebrated his success, yet he had never felt more alone. The apartment was spotless. The company was thriving. His calendar was full, but every evening, he found himself staring at the empty chair across his dining table. He missed something he couldn't buy. Peace. His phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa. Dinner tonight. Daniel looked at the screen for a long moment before replying. Sure. As he slipped the phone into his pocket, he couldn't explain why the answer felt so empty. Sometimes losing the person who believed in you doesn't hurt immediately. Sometimes the pain begins only after the applause fades and the silence finally arrives. Spring arrived with gentle sunshine and fresh beginnings. Nearly 3 years had passed since Emily walked out of the courthouse with nothing but a box of memories and a broken heart. Life looked very different now. Every morning began before dawn. Emily attended business classes. In the afternoons, she worked as an administrative assistant for a small logistics company. At night, she studied until exhaustion blurred the words on the pages. There were nights when she fell asleep at her desk. There were mornings when she questioned whether all the sacrifices were worth it. But every time doubt whispered to her, she remembered the promise she had written in her notebook. This chapter of my life belongs to me. She smiled and kept going. One rainy afternoon, the owner of the company, Mr. William Harris, walked past Emily's desk. He noticed several files arranged differently from everyone else's. Curious, he stopped. Emily. She looked up. Yes, Mr. Harris. What made you reorganize these shipment reports? Emily hesitated. I hope you don't mind. I realized we were processing the same information 3 different times. So I created a new system. Mr. Harris studied the reports. Within minutes, he realized her idea could save the company thousands of hours every year. You designed this? Emily nodded nervously. I just thought there might be a better way. Mr. Harris smiled. You've just solved a problem my managers have ignored for 2 years. Emily blinked. I didn't expect that. He laughed warmly. Neither did they. Over the following months, Mr. Harris began asking for Emily's opinion during management meetings. At first, she felt out of place. She wasn't an executive. She wasn't a consultant. She was simply the quiet woman who worked harder than anyone else. But every suggestion she offered was thoughtful. Every solution was practical. Every decision placed people before profit. Slowly, her confidence returned. Not because someone praised her, because she finally recognized the abilities that had always been inside her. One evening after work, Mr. Harris invited Emily into his office. He handed her a thick folder. I'd like you to read this. Emily looked puzzled. What is it? A proposal. She opened the folder. At the top of the first page were the words, Operations Manager Promotion. Emily looked up in disbelief. Me? Mr. Harris nodded. I've watched you for over 2 years. You lead with integrity. You solve problems. And you never ask for recognition. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. He smiled. Say yes. Emily laughed through her tears. Yes. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was beginning to change. Carter Innovations had expanded too quickly. New competitors entered the market. Several risky investments failed. Investors who once praised him now demanded answers. Board meetings became tense. Stock prices slowly declined. For the first time since becoming CEO, Daniel realized success wasn't guaranteed forever. One evening, after another difficult meeting, he sat alone in his office. He opened an old desk drawer searching for a document. Instead, he found something unexpected, a faded photograph. It showed him and Emily standing outside their first apartment. They were soaked from the rain, laughing because they couldn't afford an umbrella. Daniel stared at the picture for several seconds. He remembered that day. Emily had looked at him and said, One day we'll laugh about how hard life used to be. Daniel closed his eyes. Tears gathered before he quickly wiped them away. Success had given him everything he thought he wanted. But somehow, he had lost the one person who celebrated him before the world knew his name. Across town, Emily stood before a room full of employees, delivering her first presentation as operations manager. She spoke with quiet confidence. She answered difficult questions with calm professionalism. When the meeting ended, the room erupted in applause. Mr. Harris watched proudly from the back. His assistant leaned over and whispered, You were right about her. He smiled. No, they were wrong about her. 6 months later, an international investment group visited the company. They were searching for businesses with strong leadership to acquire and expand globally. Emily presented the company's long-term strategy. When she finished, the lead investor stood and extended his hand. Ms. Carter, have you ever considered leading a company much larger than this one? Emily smiled politely. I've learned never to underestimate where hard work can lead. The investor smiled back. I think this is only the beginning. As Emily walked out of the meeting, she had no idea. That one conversation would change her life forever. And somewhere else in the same city, Daniel's company was moving closer to the crisis that would place him face to face with the woman he never imagined he would see again. 5 years earlier, Daniel Carter had walked away from his marriage believing he was leaving behind a woman who would never recover. He couldn't have been more wrong. Present day, the headquarters of Carter Innovations stood proudly in downtown Chicago. The glass skyscraper still reflected the morning sun. Employees still hurried through its revolving doors. But something had changed. Rumors filled every hallway. The acquisition is official. The new owners arrived today. I heard they're replacing the executive team. No one even knows who the new CEO is. An uneasy silence settled over the building. Even senior executives looked nervous. On the top floor, Daniel adjusted his tie as he stared out of the window. His company no longer belonged to him. Months of financial losses had forced the board to accept an acquisition offer from one of the largest international business groups in North America. Although he had been retained as president during the transition, everyone knew one person now held the real authority. The new chief executive officer. Daniel had never met them. His assistant knocked gently. "Mr. Carter? Come in. The board meeting begins in 15 minutes. Daniel nodded. "I'll be there." As she turned to leave, she paused. "I've heard the new CEO has an incredible reputation." Daniel smiled politely. "I hope they're ready for the challenge." He had no idea. The greatest challenge waiting in that room wasn't the future of the company. It was his past. At exactly 9 o'clock, the boardroom doors opened. Directors took their seats. Department heads organized their reports. Lawyers arranged acquisition documents. The room fell silent. Everyone stood. Daniel looked toward the entrance. Several executives from the International Investment Group entered first. Then, a woman stepped through the doorway. She wore a tailored navy blue business suit. Her posture was calm. Her expression carried quiet confidence. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't need to. She had earned her place. Daniel's heart stopped. It couldn't be. Emily. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to disappear. He remembered the tiny apartment, the candlelit dinners, the rainy nights, the dreams they once shared, and the divorce papers he had placed in her trembling hands. Emily looked directly at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness, only calm professionalism. She walked to the head of the table, placed her leather portfolio on the polished wood, then looked around the room. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice was steady. "My name is Emily Carter. I've recently been appointed Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Global Holdings. As of this morning, our company officially becomes the parent company of Carter Innovations." The room remained completely silent. Some executives exchanged confused glances. Others stared at Daniel. His face had gone pale. Emily continued, "I look forward to working with each of you as we begin this new chapter together." Her eyes briefly met Daniel's. No more, no less. Simply the respectful acknowledgement of a colleague. Nothing in her expression revealed that they had once built a life together. Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he understood exactly what he had lost. The meeting began. Emily listened carefully as each department presented its reports. She asked thoughtful questions. She complimented strong performance. She challenged weak decisions with fairness. No one doubted her competence. Every answer reflected preparation. Every decision reflected wisdom. Daniel watched in stunned silence. This wasn't the quiet woman who had hidden behind him during business dinners. This was a confident leader, the kind of leader people naturally trusted. Halfway through the meeting, one executive presented a proposal to reduce staff. Emily studied the figures, then quietly closed the report. "I have a question." The executive nodded. "Yes, Ms. Carter. How many families would lose their primary source of income if we approve this plan?" The room fell silent. He hesitated. I'm not sure." Emily looked around the table. A business should never see people as numbers first. "We'll explore alternatives before asking loyal employees to carry the burden." Several board members nodded. Daniel couldn't help remembering something Emily had once said years earlier. "Success means nothing if we forget the people who helped us achieve it." Back then, he hadn't listened. Now, an entire boardroom admired the wisdom he had once taken for granted. When the meeting ended, executives slowly left the room. Daniel remained seated, unable to move. Emily gathered her documents quietly. As she reached the door, Daniel finally spoke. "Emily." She stopped, without turning around. "Yes, Mr. Carter." His voice trembled. "I never imagined." Emily slowly faced him. Her expression remained calm. "Life has a way of surprising us." Daniel searched for the right words. "I'm proud of you." Emily smiled politely. "Thank you." Nothing more. No anger. No accusations. No celebration. Only quiet dignity. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Daniel alone, with years of memories, and a heart filled with regret. Sometimes the greatest success is not proving someone wrong. It's proving to yourself that their rejection never defined your future. The boardroom was empty. Only Daniel remained. The leather chair beneath him suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. For nearly 10 minutes, he sat in complete silence. His eyes remained fixed on the chair where Emily had been sitting. The same woman he once believed wasn't sophisticated enough to stand beside him, had just led an international board meeting with confidence, wisdom, and quiet authority. Daniel slowly covered his face with both hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. No one answered. There was no one left in the room. Only his memories. That evening, Daniel drove home through the busy streets of Chicago. The city lights blurred through the windshield as memories flooded his mind. He remembered the tiny apartment where Emily had waited for him with homemade soup. He remembered the old laptop she had somehow managed to replace when his broke. He remembered the words she had spoken on the day they married. "Whether we have $1 or 1 million, I'm with you." For years, he had believed success meant gaining more. Now he realized his greatest loss wasn't financial. It was personal. Across town, Emily stood in her new office overlooking the skyline. The room was spacious but simple. There were no extravagant decorations, no expensive artwork, just neatly organized files, a bookshelf filled with leadership books, and one framed photograph. It wasn't a picture of her wedding. It wasn't a picture of an award ceremony. It was a photograph of her graduating from business school. Whenever she looked at it, she remembered one truth. Every success had been earned, not given. Her assistant knocked gently. "Ms. Carter, come in. We've scheduled meetings with all department heads." Emily smiled. "Excellent. And Mr. Carter has requested a private meeting." Emily remained quiet for a moment. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon." She nodded calmly. "Very well." The next day, Daniel stood outside Emily's office. His hand hovered over the door. For several seconds, he couldn't bring himself to knock. The secretary smiled politely. "She's expecting you." Daniel took a deep breath, then entered. Emily stood as he walked in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." Her tone was warm, but professional. Daniel looked around the office. "It suits you." Emily smiled. "Thank you." She gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Please." They sat facing one another. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times." Emily waited patiently. "I don't know where to begin." She folded her hands gently. "Then begin with the truth." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I spent years blaming my work, my responsibilities, my ambition, but none of those things destroyed our marriage." He looked at her. "I did." Emily remained silent. "I stopped seeing the woman who stood beside me before anyone else believed in me." His voice cracked. "I became so focused on building a company that I forgot the person who helped me build my life." Tears gathered in his eyes. "I'm sorry." The words hung quietly between them, not because they erased the past, but because they were finally honest. Emily looked at him with calm compassion. "Daniel, I accepted your apology in my heart a long time ago." He looked up, surprised. "You did?" She nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It means refusing to let that pain control the rest of your life." Daniel wiped away a tear. "I don't deserve your kindness." Emily smiled gently. "Perhaps not. But kindness isn't something people earn. It's something we choose." Daniel hesitated before asking the question that had weighed on him since the board meeting. "Are you happy?" Emily looked toward the window. The afternoon sun reflected across the city. She smiled softly. "For the first time in many years." "Yes." Not because life had been easy, not because she had become successful, but because she had learned something during her hardest seasons. Her worth had never depended on another person's opinion. It had always been within her. As Daniel stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Emily." She looked up. "I don't expect another chance. I know some things can't be repaired." She nodded. "But I want you to know, I'll spend the rest of my life becoming a better man than the one who walked away from you." Emily smiled. "I truly hope you do." He quietly left the office. Emily watched the door close. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She simply whispered, "We've both finally become who we were meant to be." Outside, Daniel stepped into the elevator. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits, or stock prices, or business deals. He was thinking about character, and he silently promised himself, never again would he measure a person's value by status or appearance, because he had already paid too high a price for that mistake. Regret cannot rewrite yesterday, but genuine repentance can change the person you become tomorrow. 6 months later, under Emily Carter's leadership, Horizon Global Holdings had transformed Carter Innovations into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. The atmosphere inside the headquarters had changed completely. Employees smiled more often. Departments worked together instead of competing against one another. The company launched new mentorship programs for young professionals and expanded employee education benefits. For Emily, success was never measured only by profits. It was measured by the lives they helped improve. One Monday morning, Emily walked through the lobby as employees greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Morning, everyone." She knew many of them by name. She remembered birthdays. She asked about their families. She celebrated promotions. People respected her not because of her title, but because she genuinely cared. Several long-time employees quietly remarked to one another, "The company feels different now. It feels like someone finally remembers we're human." Daniel noticed it too. As president, he worked closely with Emily, but their relationship remained entirely professional. Over the past several months, he had become quieter, humbler. He listened more than he spoke. When younger employees made mistakes, he coached them instead of criticizing them. One afternoon, a junior manager accidentally caused a costly delay on an important project. Years earlier, Daniel would have lost his temper. Instead, he calmly said, "Let's solve the problem together." The young manager looked surprised. "You are not angry?" Daniel smiled sadly. "I've learned that people grow faster when they're encouraged than when they're humiliated." Emily watched the conversation from across the room. She didn't say anything, but she smiled. Not because Daniel had changed for her, because he had finally become the leader he once dreamed of being. A few weeks later, the company hosted its annual Leadership Excellence Gala. Executives, employees, investors, and community leaders filled the grand ballroom. The chairman of the board stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, this evening, we celebrate more than financial success. We celebrate leadership that changes lives." He paused. "This year's Leadership Excellence Award goes to..." He smiled toward the front table. "Emily Carter." The ballroom erupted into applause. Emily walked to the stage with quiet grace. She accepted the award, then stood before the microphone. The room gradually became silent. She looked across the audience. Many expected a speech about business. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "There was a time when I believed my value depended on someone else's approval." She paused. "But life has a way of teaching us that our worth isn't determined by titles, or wealth, or the opinions of others. Our worth is found in our character." The audience listened in complete silence. She continued, "I've learned that success means very little if we forget kindness. It means very little if we climb to the top by stepping on the people who helped us along the way." She smiled warmly. "And if my journey has taught me anything, it's that the greatest victories are not the ones that make us look important. They're the ones that make us become better people." When she finished, the audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation filled the ballroom. Among those applauding, Daniel stood with tears in his eyes, not because he wished Emily had failed, but because he finally understood the extraordinary woman she had always been. After the ceremony, Daniel quietly approached Emily. "I wanted to congratulate you." Emily smiled. "Thank you." He looked around the nearly empty ballroom. "You know, I used to think success meant being admired." She listened. "Now I think it means becoming someone worthy of admiration." Emily nodded gently. "I think you've learned an important lesson." Daniel smiled. "I had an excellent teacher. For the first time in many years." They both laughed. Not as husband and wife, not as strangers, but as two people who had finally found peace with the past. Later that evening, Emily walked outside. The city lights shimmered beneath the clear night sky. She stood quietly, taking in the cool evening air. Her phone rang. It was Grace. "My dear, I watched your speech online." Emily smiled. "Were you proud?" Grace laughed warmly. "I've always been proud of you." Emily's eyes filled with happy tears. "I wish my parents could have seen tonight." Grace's voice softened. "I believe they did." Emily looked toward the stars. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Thank you. Not for the heartbreak, not for the betrayal, but for the strength that had carried her through both." Life has a remarkable way of restoring what pain tries to steal. Not always by giving us back what we lost, but by helping us become someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than we ever imagined. The people who underestimate your value do not decide your future. Your character does. And sometimes, the greatest success is discovering that the person you were searching for all along was the stronger version of yourself waiting to rise.